Hi friends. The number of drum software and apps available can sometimes be overwhelming, and it's changed a lot in the last 5 years. If you're looking to take your drums to the next level in your recordings, you might be looking at perhaps some really good new sounds, and that can be distracting because it's a lot more than just the sounds. There are drum machine apps, and there are patterns and beat creation utilities. There are programs that specialize in interesting grooves, and you have to decide, do you want software that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, or are you the type of person that wants to program everything yourself? You'll also have to evaluate your goals. For a lot of drum software, the objective is to make it sound as close to acoustic instruments as possible. The playing of the drums as close to a real drummer. Those are typical goals, but in a lot of electronic, house, EDM type beat music, beats are experimental and they're using sounds that are not as common as before. Some of these apps have a randomization capability, and you'll have to look at that and say, is that something that I want and need? In this video, I'm going to try and lay things out, simplify things, and take away that confusion. I've divided this video up into sections because it's a long video. But I do this with all my videos. I use the chapters function so that you can skip through to the things that interest you the most. But the way this video is organized is this. I have a section on understanding the landscape of all these drum machines and drum synths. Then I talk about the evaluation criteria, which I assembled into a spreadsheet. Then I talk about common features that you'll find in all of these packages, regardless of the platform or the vendor. We talk about individual software demos. This is the long section where you can go through each of the products that I evaluated and get a brief demo. Then there are certain use cases that I think are relevant to making your decision. Then I'll go over the differences. This is really the criteria that matters, not what's common, but what's different in each one of these packages. And then I'll talk about what to buy, and I'll conclude with a summary. First, I'm going to address software that runs on a Mac or a PC. But I'm going to make reference to the similar apps that run on iOS for your iPad or an iPhone. I'm likely to put together a separate video on iOS drum apps. I've looked at roughly 20 different drum software applications, ranging from drum samplers, drum synths, and drum machines. The scope of this video is really focused on software, not physical drum machine devices. That's a whole other topic, and I might do a video on that in the future. I've divided up my analysis into 6 different types, and this is an important concept throughout this video. The first group are drum sample players, and these are perhaps the most common and new. They assume that you'll want to load your own samples. They come with some samples, but they also expect that you will have downloaded some samples, or you might be using a library like Splice or Loopcloud to gather your samples. The next category are drum synths. These are, as it suggests, a synthesizer that creates drum-like sounds. These are very common. Some of the most famous synths are things like 808s and the Linn Drum Machine, and this is kind of where they come from. Nowadays, you can get drum synth results both as a sample or from a synth, but we'll go over the differences in a little bit more. Then there are drum sample collections or suites. These are usually high-end and a bit more expensive, and they've been around for quite a while. And the last category here are plug-in sample players. And the reason I highlight these as being slightly different than Group 1 is that they're sponsored by a store. So ADSR has their own drum machine, and Loopcloud has something called Drum. Of course, those particular applications are geared towards buying samples and sample packs from those vendors. Just to round things out, I'm also going to include an analysis of what your typical DAW has. I'm going to use Logic Pro as an example, but it's the same whether you have Ableton or Studio One or Reason or FL Studio. They all come with some kind of drum machine. The last category is all about bundled software. If you buy something like Native Instruments Komplete 13 or 14, it includes anywhere from 6 to 10 different drum instruments, and I'm going to touch on how those are different and how that fits into the total landscape. A picture is sometimes worth 1,000 words. The drum sample players tend to look like this, so this will help you remember. There's an emphasis perhaps on the sequencing or the browsing technique, or even a new look, like in patterning, which has kind of a wheel concept. Then the drum synths look a little bit more traditional, but they have some unique features in them that relates to the generation of the sound and how to make kits out of that sound. The drum sample collections, they're selling you sounds, and they're trying to convince you that their collection of curated drum sounds recorded in a professional studio are the best. Some of them are very limited in terms of their sequencing and other features like randomization, but they're all selling you on the concept of these are the sounds you get in our collection. That last category, you'll see they look pretty similar. They have a mixer and they have pads where you can randomly assign sounds to those pads. There isn't as much difference you'll find as you go through these other than their hooks into the source for the samples. I'm going to use Logic as a reference. Here's some snapshots of what it looks like. And here's the Native Instruments Komplete 13 or 14 collection. Here's just a few of what the instruments in that collection look like. So if you can take away the fact that there are 6 different types to remember, my recommendations kind of follow those lines. So here we go, right to the point. In the drum sample player group, there's a really tough battle going on between EXO, which is by Excellent Audio, and I would have made that my number one choice. But there is a newcomer called Atlas, and their latest release, 2.3, is really close to what EXO can deliver and maybe stronger in certain areas. So it's kind of a tie between those two, but EXO's been around a while, and you'll find a lot more people recommending it. In the drum synth category, it's a little bit more clear. DrumComputer is definitely the leader in that space. The other ones are great, but DrumComputer is perhaps the most powerful and flexible. In the drum sample collection or suites, it's generally you get what you pay for. Superior Drum by TuneTrack is the leading product. It's the most expensive product in the suite, and it comes with the most extensive library of recorded sounds. When I started this analysis, I had questions. Do I need third-party drum software at all? And the answer to that is maybe. If you're using a DAW already, you should get familiar with what's included, and you can download some free drum software and play around with it before you decide to spend money on a third-party application. Drum samples or drum synth? Well, that's a difficult question. They sound different, and there's different types of flexibility with both, but if you have the money, both would be nice. One from each category would give you the ultimate inflexibility. Who has the best sounding drums? Well, this is really the ongoing question about this process. That is really a matter of taste and the genre that you're looking. You know, if an EDM beats type producer, one package is going to suit you better than perhaps one that's rock and metal oriented. But generally in this space, you get what you pay for. So the more money you spend, the higher the quality of the drum sound recordings are. You're basically paying for the work they did in the studio to isolate those sounds in different rooms and record them with expensive mics and then make them available. And that's very much the essence of replacing drummer and acoustic drums with a package. How good do they sound? Do I need the sequencer, patterns, or just the drum sounds? Well, again, this is kind of a matter of taste, but in my opinion, you need both. You need the good sounds as a starting point, but it's nice to have a sequencer and patterns that are geared specifically to drums. Are all of these features just MIDI? Well, yeah, they are. When you dig into this, you find out that all of the advanced capabilities built into these packages are really just manipulating MIDI. Whether it's humanize or randomize or swing or any of these things, we're really talking about just modifying MIDI information that you can then drag into your digital audio workstation. 2 more concepts that are relevant to my analysis relate to the goals. Why are you looking at a drum machine? Why are you looking at third-party software? The first one's called what I refer to as the realism scale. On the far right of this scale, you've got real drums, things that sound like a real drummer and real acoustic drums. And then on the left, you've got beat making or sound design type drum machines that lend themselves to EDM and other genres. And each package falls somewhere on this scale. So things like Superior Drums and Easy Drummer are definitely focused on real drums, curated sounds, Whereas things like beat tweaker and patterning kind of fall into the experimental side, and there are lots that kind of fall into the middle of this scale. So how much realism do you want in your results? It relates to your goals. The other scale that matters is the drum, what I call the drum talent scale. You've got quite a difference between, say, experienced drummers on the right and non-drummers on the left. If you're creating beats with software, an experienced drummer is going to know things like when hi-hat hits can fit in, how the ride would play, when a tom fill, how a tom fill is executed. But a non-drummer would be more inclined to use experimental capabilities. Perhaps the hi-hats play all the way through. You could have drums being played at the same time that a real drummer could not possibly execute, but it creates a really unique beat for some unique music. Before I get into the product demos, it's important to know there are common features to all these drum machines. And they can be divided into two groups. There's the subject of how you manage sounds. How do you find and filter the sounds that you need to build your drum kit? Then there are patterns or grooves, and how you make those patterns, make those beats. On the one hand, you've got tools that help you manage your sound library for the appropriate sounds, and you've got sequencers or step editors that let you manage patterns and create grooves. Every one of these packages has some kind of sample or sound browser with search capabilities, the ability to make kits, and they come with presets. Some come with a few, some come with a lot. They all generally support some kind of sequencer or step editor that starts out with at least 8 lanes or 8 different drum parts and a grid of 16, which often can be expanded to 32 or reduced to even 4 beats. They all let you sync the tempo and transport to your DAW control. That way you can turn off and on record and play and make sure the beats per minute is in sync between the drum machine and your DAW. They all usually have a mixer. Some of them have effects built in. Most of them have some modulation capabilities that let you alter the sound with attack, delay, and release. They usually have some kind of groove editor, or sometimes they call it a groove doctor, to derive a groove in terms of MIDI from a song and then apply it to your drum beat. They all let you export MIDI and audio, usually through some drag and drop capabilities. So you build your beats, you build your fills and all your component parts in the drum machine and then drag them into your digital audio workstation. And they all support these standards for the most part. Some of them have a song mode, which kind of extends the capabilities of the sequencer to build choruses, verses, and all the other parts of your song right in the drum machine. Now, the sequencer or patterns, they have a lot of consistent features: quantizing, velocity, pitch pan, tone, some EQ things like low and high cut filter. A few of them have this probability or chance capability, and that's where you choose whether a note or a hit is going to happen or not happen. So you can change the chance or probability to 50%. When it goes through the beat multiple times, that note might be hit or may not. And probability is kind of an interesting play. It makes your beats sound a bit more different as you go through a song. Most of them have decay, nudge, swing. These are all things that adjust the MIDI. They all have roll, flam, or repeat for, rapid snares or rapid hi-hat hits. Some of them have randomization, which is quasi-artificial intelligence built on some algorithms. If you're not sure how to create a beat or how to create a hi-hat rhythm, you can use the randomization capability. Most of them also have humanize, which introduces some variations into your beat so it doesn't sound so robotic. It sounds more like a real drummer. A few have envelope transient shaping, and some have what we call an A-B switch. You can create 2 beats at the same time, an A and a B. You can switch back and forth between them to decide which one you like and which one you're going to keep. Now, if you don't understand all of these common features, don't worry about it, because as I go through the product demos, you're going to see them demonstrated and develop a better understanding of why they are common. Preset, just double click on one, hit play. So you can mute and solo each track. You've got 8 tracks to work with. Sequence pattern can be longer than this. You're picking a sample essentially. You can randomize by clicking this big button, come up with a new pattern. If you like, you can lock some of the beats, some of the parts, and then it will just randomize the ones that are not locked. Play again. You view the steps, the density of each note, the pitch of each note. You can see you can adjust the pitch. You can put in a flam or roll for any note. You can control the volume and pan. Those are the basic parameters. It does have a mixer. Those are the basic capabilities. Among the presets, you can download all kinds of presets in these groups. Here's one called Fused. You can preview the group, or you can load it by double-clicking. Like all these packages, you can save your beats, turn off and on the sequencing, use the random pattern. It's pretty extensive. The randomness is really a feature of Playbeat that sets it apart. You can pick the range of the randomness. So, for example, if I want to change the hi-hat pattern, I can lock the rest, and I can pick a minimum, maximum value for that random. Another thing you'll find here is, of course, you can save favorites. There are user presets you can load, but they have this smart randomization category. The beats that you save in this random category called smart will influence how random patterns are created. So, got to be careful what you put in there. Let's just listen to a few more. You notice that the patterns can sequence at different times. So you can have a sequence that's 8 bars, 16 bars, 4 bars. The patterns can go forward and backwards. There's a lot of flexibility. Playbeat by Audio Modern has a slightly more extensive website, and I think that's because they're bundling this product with some others. So, the fact that Playbeat runs both on iOS and Mac and Windows and stuff is an indication of how they're trying to cover the marketplace quite extensively. So there's different pricing. They tell you right away, which is really nice. There's a free version you can download and try. And of course, there are links to their videos on how it works. But what they're really selling is this groove creation capability. So, their sequencer is pretty good. It's nice. It's very satisfying visually. And it has this random capability built in. So consequently, you don't need as many delivered patterns with this tool because it will randomly create patterns, and there are presets, and the preset management capability is pretty good. You can export to MIDI or WAV. There's really no limitations there. There's not as much emphasis on buying expansions and packs, even though they have some. The ones that they have are largely free, so they've been created by the larger community out there in YouTube land, and you can explore their packs, which is a link right here. I got all their packs. Since they were free, I figured why not download them. For Playbeat, the strengths are focused around the randomization. It's intelligent, it's smart, and they market themselves as a groove creation machine. They also promote a community style for sharing beats and sounds. It is multi-platform, so if you're looking for one product that'll run on iOS as well as Mac and Windows, this will do it. It is fairly easy to learn. On the negative side, there are only 8 lanes. So if you want more than 8 drum parts, you'll input multiple instances of Playbeat into your DAW. There's no built-in effects, and there are limited modulation options. as a way to browse through your samples. Every dot is a sample in your sample library, and it comes delivered with about 8,000 samples. So the dots you click on are the drums on the left that fill the 8 slots to play a beat. The similar drums are shown down at the bottom here, similarity. So as it's playing, you can cycle through similar, let's say that you've got this snare over here. You want to hear similar snares. It's that similar capability that makes this browser unique. You see, you can sort of draw what samples you want to take a look at. They're organized by the tones themselves. It also has an edit capability. So for each sample, you can change things like the sample itself, start and stop, all the typical sample modifications, pan, pitch, tone, velocity. And then there's a sequencer off to the side here. And of course, there's presets. The presets contain both sounds and beats. Down here you can modify things like the velocities and the attenuation. You can draw curves. Everything's customizable, very much the same way it is in most of these packages. What makes this unique is that you can change the beats very subtly just by cycling through similar beats. So you'll notice over here we have different patterns with the same sound. Let's just take a basic sound, play it. When you are browsing through that space, you can limit what you see, but you can pick which groups are included. See, if I turn some of these off, the number of samples from which to choose can get smaller. Essentially, I've added libraries that I already had on my hard drive. You do that by clicking on this button, put in the location of your sample libraries. You don't have to copy them or duplicate them. It will scan them and refresh, and all of your samples are available to you. You can get an understanding of what their marketing message is. How do they see themselves positioned in the drum machine market? First of all, they highlight their strength, which I think is their browser. It looks like a cloud. It captures all the samples that you may have stored in various places on your local storage, but it also includes around 8,000 samples from excellent audio. And then off to the left, you see there's eight tracks, and then their strength is really going through variations of the same samples and letting you browse those samples. So they talk a lot about how it affects your workflow and the fact that you can add all of these sample libraries that you may have accumulated without copying that data. It just scans it in place, which is kind of cool. And the exploring is really, the strength. It has a sequencer, and the sequencer's not bad. It's aimed clearly at drum sequencing. It starts off with 16 steps, which isn't many, and 8 tracks. And then there are tweaking capabilities. I talk about these as just pretty much the standard modulation type features. Here's another view of the beat combiner, which is sort of an extension of the sequencer. It just allows you to tweak how the individual beats are played through the sequencer. It's pretty good. It does have a random feature, which a lot of these newer products have. It's here down at the bottom. And you can pick and choose what's random. Am I going to make my hi-hat a random pattern that maybe I didn't program? Of course, they sell expansions. If you don't have a lot of samples and you want to use their curated samples, there's plenty to choose from. You would buy those separately. But I got to say, out of the box, what they deliver is pretty good. The strengths of the XO Drum Machine really lie in the space browser. That feature of how to browse samples both from libraries that you've loaded and from their own library is their strength. Sample management and preview is the other important part about that. Finding samples that are appropriate for your drum machine, that is done in a very unique way. There is a feature in there called drumminess, which is kind of an AI view of what sounds go together. And of course, you've seen the similarity algorithm, which lets you swap in different sounds for each drum that are similar to the beat that you're trying to create. It also has a history function, which is great. So if you have browsed a particular sample and you can't remember which one it is, you can pull it up in the history. It's medium effort to learn. On the weaknesses side, there isn't much, but there's only 8 lanes. So again, this is one of those products where you may have to have more than one instance of EXO running in your DAW. And the sequencer is kind of limited. It isn't quite as powerful as some of the other products we're looking at, but it's pretty good and it has some creative ideas. You get this earth view, they call it, where all your samples are kind of grouped together. There's a snare, all these different sounds. Essentially, you can take one of those sounds, populate this grid, maybe grab a kick, and you can click on Make a New Kit, if you like, and it will pre-populate all the other fields. It's kind of cool. There's a little zoom in, zoom out button, so you can navigate your way around this cloud of assorted sounds, which they call a map. Then there's a sequencer, and you can create your own sequence. Well, you get the basic idea. It doesn't take long. Now, you can also randomly create sequences. So if you choose to create those sequences, either variations of what you have or completely random, you can just click on New Sequence. The neat thing about this is that the drum kits and the sequences are 2 separate things. So if you click on New Kit, it'll pre-populate the kit with a bunch of new sounds. You see up in that browser mode, it sort of shows you what's happening, what's taking place. There's kind of 2 views of the world. One is this Earth view, and the other one is a galaxy view, which will include a lot more samples. If you enable this, just hovering over some sounds, they'll execute. It's kind of a good way to find a sample. The other concept that's really cool here is maps. So this map was made up of delivered Atlas samples, and there was around 1,500 samples in there, but you can create your own maps. So, for example, if you want to create a new map, you can give it a name. New Jag 2. You can change the color of it, and then over here, you can add the location of those samples. So in my case, I have a sample library. I'm going to choose all the synthwave 80s drums, and I have this other thing I just loaded with a bunch of drum samples. There are some advanced options off to the side here. In my case, I only want drum samples, and then you click on Build Map. You have to wait, but it essentially goes through cataloging, indexing all of the samples that already reside on your local hard drive to create your own map. There you go. Kind of neat. Again, you can move it around. So these are all samples from my own library. That one sounds like somebody punching you in the face. Default's a 4x4 grid, but if you click on there, you can see you can have an 8x8 or things that match your Launchpad if you have a Launchpad or an Ableton push device. Okay, back to the sequencer. Any sequence or drum kit that you create, you can save. So I can click on Save, give it a name, 02. It's going to save both items. If you take a look under User here, Test 02, there's 2 bits. There's the individual kit with all of its elements and the pattern. You can see all these particular patterns. It's great that they're all independent because you can basically drag any of this stuff back into the sequencer or back into the kits. When you click on a sample in the browser, you get certain options up here. You can make it a favorite. You can remove it. There's some minimal changes that you can make in terms of the MIDI channel. But when you click on a sample in your kit, you get more advanced capabilities. You can adjust the gain and the shape and some filter and pitch information, which is pretty standard stuff. But under advanced, you can actually edit the sample itself. You can adjust the variation. For example, on velocity right now, there's no variation, but if you increase that to 40%, the velocity will vary for that particular sample. You can vary the pitch, and all of these elements really are an effort to humanize what it is you hear. Down in the sequencer, if you click on the name, you also get to see velocity information. So if I click on solo and play, we'll just you can see I can vary the velocities. And I can do that for any one of these. Back in the kit view, there are options. You can lock any one of these. And in doing so, when you click on New Kit, it's only going to replace the other unlocked samples. There is a hot swap capability. This hot swap, it'll just keep changing that particular sound until you find a kick that you like. Back in the sequencer, there's a way to handle polyrhythms, and that is on the far right, you can drag the number of bars in. So in this case, the kick would only be 4 bars long, even though the rest of the beat is longer. Lastly, there's an export feature, which is quite sophisticated. You can export MIDI or audio, and you have a choice of whether you want it as a mixed down track, which would render a single track, or stems, where each one of these tracks will be exported individually. So if you want the MIDI into your DAW in 7 or 8 different files, is the way to do it. If you want the audio, same thing. You click on stems, render those, and you'll get separate files. The strengths include browsing multiple maps, what they call the Earth or Galaxy. The fact that you can create multiple maps is really quite powerful. The sample library management and preview is very similar to XO, but it's different, and it has what I think is an up-and-coming, interesting way to browse through your samples and find what you're looking for. Randomization is equally smart in Atlas 2. It has excellent kit making. There's a button, New Kit. Does just what you think. It generates a new kit. It supports a 4x4, 8x8, 1x8, 2x8 grids. I like that flexibility because I have a launch pad with 64 buttons on it. The sequencer is feature strong, and it has a button for new patterns. So not only can you randomize individual parts of your pattern, but you can get a whole new pattern and swap different patterns with different kits back and forth. There's this hot swap capability, which is very similar to the similarity function in XO. The export is pretty strong. You can export MIDI and audio just as you would expect in most of these products. On the weaknesses side, I haven't really found any. So you start off with these general views where you can see the individual drums that have been assigned to each lane. And if you click on the number sign for each one of those 8, it brings up the drum synth. And the synth is organized into several sound sources. There's a resonator, there's a wavetable. You've got either wavetable or analog sources for your sound. And there's this last category for resynth and sampler. So potentially you can pick a sample as your source. And you can load your own samples in here if you want, but it's a combination of all these things. You can turn each one of them off or on, and then you've got effects and EQ and some global settings for envelope modulation and pitch bend, all of these other things. There's just a ton of flexibility, and that's for each drum. Okay, and then you can save, of course, all of those things as a preset, and it has a feature here called Make a Kit, where you can assign all of the drums to your own kit. And let's just pull up an example here. That's a really peculiar sound. Here's the sequencer in DrumComputer. I was pretty impressed with this thing. You'll notice in this pattern that sequences can go backwards and forwards, so you can change the direction backwards and forwards, forwards. Every line can have its own sequence. Also, the number of bars, you're not limited to 16 beats. You can have up to 64 beats. You know, a pattern could be quite long. The other thing is that you can have all your patterns in a row. So you see this lights up. There's 16 different patterns in this group, and you can cycle through them. So, you know, you could have different variations of this beat for each section of your song. I mentioned before that in this area, we've got these bars that you can control. You can control the velocity, the probability of a note being executed. So, for example, if you increase this probability, it's actually the opposite. It may not execute if the probability is increased. And you can program in rolls, offsets, decay, pitch, and modulation. So, for example, if you want to modify, let's say, the velocity of these notes, you could just randomly generate patterns. You can click on that dice and it will randomly vary the velocity, or you can do it yourself. And it's got some predefined ways. So there's like a step pattern you can use, or an up and down pattern you can use. And then, of course, the whole beat, if you want, you can click on the random button here to generate an entirely different beat with those sounds that you've selected. So you see, I'm just clicking on random and it's randomizing the whole thing. Every time you find a random pattern that you like, you can tweak it, modify it, and just save it to one of these pattern slots down here. It did occur to me that this might be the most comprehensive sequencer. And because it generates MIDI, potentially you could just copy this MIDI into your DAW, and then if you don't like the sounds from DrumComputer, you can pick your own drum sounds. You don't have to stick with the ones that this particular software creates. DrumComputer has certain strengths. I would say it's the pinnacle of synthetic beats. It has a hybrid synth and sample sound source option, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's an excellent synth, but if you want to start with a sample, you can do that as well. Though randomization capabilities are similar to the other products we've looked at, the sequencer is very strong, perhaps the best of all of the Drum Machine apps that I've taken a look at. There are multiple sound engines and a resynth capability, which is quite unique. There are literally millions of drum sound. It only has 8 lanes, but it's offset by chaining, which is a feature to create your patterns and save them as a song. It has limited sample library management capabilities. It's a bit more complex to learn. The interesting thing about patterning too is the way it looks. First of all, you can record a beat to make your own pattern, which is kind of cool. But it's going to be rendered as this circle. And everything that you do in terms of sequencing is represented in the pies and segments of this circle. So the speed with which it goes through the individual sections, to controlling the layers and the number of sounds that are being executed, is represented on this circle. It's very, very interesting. Of course, it has all of the standard things. You can solo a channel, you can randomize certain amounts like the velocities, and you can see just here on the quadrants on the right that notes are being played sequentially, like rapidly. You can solo channels, you can change the quantization. So if you divide up that circle into a greater number of segments, you get a higher resolution to the sequencer. You know, we're used to seeing 16 segments or 4 bars in a step, but here you can divide up that circle into 32 steps or more even. There's an example where you double a loop length. Of course, you manage drum kits. You can create your own kits or use these preset kits, and it's going to replace the drums that are being played in the sequencer with a new kit, or you can tailor specifically what drums are in that kit. So if I want a unique snare or a different kit, a different kick, or just different sounds, I can pick those individual sounds. You can see in this view, it's a sample player, so you can modify those samples as necessary. You can randomize the amount of quantization, which will make it sound more human. And you can control all the typical parameters that we covered in the common features discussion at the beginning of this video. No surprise, it has full modulation controls, attack, delay, the release. And then it does have a mixer view where you can control the balance between the different drum parts. Patterning too has some strengths. The most obvious is the sequencer. It's a circle. It's a new way of looking at the way you create beats. Visualizing a beat is much easier in that circle pattern than it is in some sequencers. They make extensive use of the randomization, not just in terms of selecting the drum sounds, but also randomizing things like velocity and decay. The biggest weakness, it's only available for iOS, and it has very limited kitting capability to create your own kit, and consequently library management. There's no strong particular browser like in EXO or Atlas. Addictive Drums is the first one I'm looking at in this category of curated sounds. And if you're making the choice on how to select these, it really comes down to whether you like the sounds or not, because there's minimal other features built into this that let you tailor the sound other than to pick the drums. So you get this view, it's kind of a mixer view where you can pick individual kicks and snares and cymbals and group together a variety of your own custom drum kit based on the hundreds of drums that they deliver when you buy the package. You can see from this screen that there are some capabilities to modify that sound, like the attack and the decay, and if you run out of options on that particular drum sound, you can actually buy more individual drums and add them to your kit. On the plus side, there's a tremendous variety of different drum sounds. And keep in mind that these products are designed to replace a drummer, an acoustic drum kit with software. So the more flexibility you have to pick the individual drums, the better. You'll notice that every kit comes with an assortment of grooves that you can pick and choose. Now those grooves you can drag and drop into your DAW and modify the MIDI to your taste, but it's a starting point for intros, verses, and choruses, and the parts that make up an individual song. Addictive Drums is a lot like the other solutions in this category. It has certain strengths, mostly centered around high-quality studio recorded sounds. It is sold as curated collections, so if there's multiple things that you want, you have to buy multiple pieces. And it really comes down to taste. Do you like their sounds? It is easy to learn. On the weaknesses side, typical of this category, you've got no randomization, really no sequencer, although there are drum grooves, which are captured as MIDI, that you can drag into your DAW. It's missing any common features that we've discussed earlier, and worst of all, you can't add your own samples. Slate Drums has been around for a while. It's quite mature, and it's got some great capabilities. You're essentially picking either instruments or building a kit. You're looking at the free version that comes with just a few kits to find. A lot of people like the simplicity of this model. You can modify the sounds. You can see here there's modulation effects, and you can adjust things like the room that those drums are sit in. It does have a mixer view, and there are grooves instead of a sequencer. Groups are nicely organized into intros, verses, and choruses. They're stored as MIDI, and you can just drag those grooves into your DAW to build a song. So to get started with Slate Drums is pretty easy. As I mentioned, you can modify those kits. If you buy the full version, of course, you get a lot more individual kits. There's full MIDI learn capabilities if you want to set this up with eDrums or a controller, MIDI controller that you might have. And there's a lot of settings that are pretty flexible and have evolved over the years to make this a pretty standard full-featured package. Each kit comes with its own collection of grooves, which is kind of tailored to the genre and style of drums that you're probably going to be creating using that kit sound. For Slate Drums, the strengths center around the number of kits and grooves that come delivered. Remember, this is curated sounds. It's not a sample player or a drum synth. It has a distinctive sound. Further qualify as being a little bit old. There is great support for eDrums, and the quality of the samples and kit building is strong. It's fairly easy to learn. It is surpassed by competitors like Get Good Drums and Superior 3. So if you're only picking one, you either really like the Slate drum sound or you look at the others. There's no randomization and really no sequencer. It's missing many of the common features we've discussed earlier, but like I say, it's designed to be a drum replacement and you're going to use your DAW. Get Good Drums has some really great sounds. But as soon as you go to their website, you can tell how it's being marketed. Essentially, you're buying packs, depending on the genre that you want. And each pack has pretty limited functionality to modify the sound. The other important thing to keep in mind is that each pack that you buy is really only just one kit. I tried to download the 14-day trial. I had great difficulty installing it on my Mac. So what they're selling is just one kit at a time, but that kit is carefully curated with all the articulations and individual drum sounds that you're going to need. So they try to position it as there's nothing more than taking our kit, plunking it down into your DAW, and you're ready to go. Mix ready is the terminology they use. Good to go out of the box. It does have a built-in groove player and reverb, but it only comes with a limited number of grooves. There is parallel compression and some gain control that's pretty good, but not a lot of features. So when you first open it, it's going to run in the Native Instruments Contact player. It does have a mixer for the individual drums, and that includes things like room mics and overheads. In the articulations page, you've got things like stick clicks and cross stick and all these variations, even so much as the sound of the beater, the kick beater. And you can decide how you want to incorporate those into your programming. When it comes to grooves, there's actually third-party vendors that sell groove packs. In this case, if you find that the delivered product doesn't have enough grooves for you to create your own sounds, you would buy one of these groove packs. Get Good Drums has a lot of strengths, higher quality drum sounds, maybe one of the highest in this category, but you consume them one kit per collection. So you're not buying multiple kits. If you want multiple kits, you have to buy multiple elements in the collection, and that can add up. There are minimal options to adjust the sounds in this case, but there is a good groove player. The weaknesses are it runs through Native Instruments Contact Sampler, which is free, so it's not a big issue. Very limited sequencers. Plan to use your DAW. It has solid collections, but it can get expensive. There's no modulation or effects built in, and there's no randomization, so you're really just buying the sounds here. Easy Drummer and Superior Drummer are from the same vendor. They both have this grid tool, and in this case, that grid tool can be used to humanize or apply timing styles to make the drum groove a little bit more interesting. Now, when you choose a humanized style, it will vary things like the velocity. These are features that you're pretty familiar with. Halftime shuffle performance. Even a double time. Here's an example where you can vary the hi-hat, and there is micro timing adjustments that you can make. Now, if you have eDrums, this product comes ready to integrate with your eDrums. It'll find your controller, or you can scan for that device and just select the MIDI mapping that's appropriate for your drum kit. If you don't see your drum kit on there, you can click Learn, hit the pad, and teach Easy Drummer which drums hit what sounds. For the hi-hat in particular, there's a lot of flexibility which can control how open and close and how subtle the hi-hat behavior is, and then you can save it. You can customize the MIDI of any of the drums in a drum kit, and in doing so, pick a particular style which will modify the articulations and all of the details that will suit the instrument and the chosen groove that you're going to apply for that instrument. What's cool about this is that you can choose variations that fall into the same genre and will change things like, say, the toms and spread them across multiple toms. One of the other features is that you can have ghost notes be applied. And you can determine to what degree you want those ghost notes to be applied. Easy Drummer has a very capable mixer. It's quite extensive. You get to hear drums not just through their close mics, but also through the overheads and room mics or ambience channels will show up throughout the entire mixer. And the channels in the mixer change with every preset that you take. Also, the effect dials that you see below the mixer are variable depending on what preset and what controls you happen to be using. In this case, a group of mixers are being assigned to one knob. You can change the entire panning to be the audience perspective or the drummer perspective. Easy Drummer 3 also includes percussion, which you can see off to the right. And they're always available regardless of what library you've selected. Cool thing about the percussion is that it has its own grooves, and you can copy and cut and paste those grooves into your own beat, which will show up in the grid editor. Or you can manually pick the articulations that are going to be applied for something like, in this case, the shaker. Another great feature is the song creator in Easy Drummer. It makes it really easy to compose. So you find a groove that you like, you drag it into the creator, and then it'll find a collection of grooves that are related to the genre and the original MIDI that you're interested in. And you'll see on the display, it divides it up into intros, verses, and choruses, all in a graphical way. And if you like what you see, you can just drag that into the song editor mode. One step more is you can substitute any of those parts, which is really good. If you don't like the verse or chorus, you can choose alternatives. You can also record an entire groove, or you can have Easy Drummer decide that groove for you. Once you've tapped it in, it'll search for similar grooves that match what you're trying to accomplish. That's called tap to find. In this example, you see a sequencer with just a couple of rows. But every time you tap on another drum, it's going to add another row to the sequencer. And you can change the timing of the sequencer or the granularity. It's extremely flexible. Another unique feature is something called bandmate, where you can drag music or audio from a source or a MIDI file, and it will analyze it and come up with matching drum beats, give you options around the tempo or the time signature, and will try to mimic what you've dragged into bandmate. Not only can it create bass parts or guitar parts, but it can create keyboard parts based on that source audio file. It uses transient detection to determine exactly how to find grooves that match up with what you're after, and that's called sound generation. There aren't many products that have this sound generation capability, which is really impressive for a drum machine. Easy Drummer and Superior Drummer 3 are both from the same vendor, so keep in mind they share some strengths. They are the highest quality drum sounds in this category, best of the group, #1 features for sequencing, humanization, those other things that we talked about. It comes with 15 gigabytes of samples, and you can load your own. There are hundreds of patterns, but you can also create your own MIDI grooves. There is a useful song mode for chaining together your beats and parts. There are newer sounds, and version 3 just came out. There's a bandmate feature that's trying to be artificial intelligence for randomization. There are solid collections, but it can get expensive. Think of Superior Drummer 3 as just being Easy Drummer 3 with much, much more. And you can pretty well guarantee that everything in Easy Drummer 3 is there for Superior, but they've added all kinds of extra things like 35 effects and 235 gigabytes of samples, so it's quite a bit more extensive. So for the next part of this video, I'm just going to look at the differences, the features that are built into Superior Drummer 3 over and above what you get in Easy Drummer.
Countless new features and a massive library of drum samples configured for use in anything from stereo up to 11.1 systems. At the heart of Superior Drummer 3 are the drums, boasting more than 230 gigabytes of raw, unprocessed sounds, divided over 7 kits, numerous additional instruments, and optional tools like brushes, rods, and mallets. Superior Drummer 3 is arguably the most comprehensive source of acoustic drum sounds on the market. The core library was recorded by George Massenburg, who's had a monumental impact on the world of audio technology. Aside from receiving almost any imaginable industry award or engineering and producing countless records from the 1970s on, In addition to the core sound library, approximately 350 individually sampled electronic drum sounds are provided, making Superior Drummer 3 an unequaled palette of sound for crafting custom drum mixes for any genre. With Superior Drummer 3, only your imagination sets the limits. Build drum stacks, import your own or third-party samples, and save your custom drum projects for quick access. Superior Drummer 3 is the ultimate framework for creative and advanced sound design. You can now scale the interface to fit any screen or need. You can detach windows and build your own custom layouts. And all instruments and kits in the core sound library feature individual graphics. The mixer boasts 35 new low-footprint effects, making each channel a virtual sound processing powerhouse. Route, bus, send, saturate, blend, and mix. The creative options are endless. Superior Drummer 3 also introduces seamless integration of offline audio to MIDI conversion. Built on a highly advanced instrument recognition artificial intelligence, the tracker detects hits with an unequaled accuracy and speed. Through the seamless integration with Superior Drummer 3, replacing or augmenting drums has never been quicker or more powerful. Finally, the heartbeat of any song is the groove. Superior Drummer 3 includes key features like Edit Playstyle, Tap to Find, MIDI Drop Zone, Song Creator, and the Song Track, allowing you to effortlessly find the groove you're looking for, to make custom beats, or dive deep into fine-tuning the timing and velocity detail in the built-in grid editor.
Superior Drummer is really the apex of this category. The strengths are the same as Easy Drummer 3, but there's more to it. 230 gigabytes of samples, and you can import your own. It comes delivered with 35 built-in effects processors, so you can modify the sounds of those samples. Audio to MIDI conversion is a feature here if you want to import audio and then pick up the MIDI beat and apply that to your beat. It does include electronic sounds. Things like reverse, pitch envelopes, macros, bleeds, and stacks are all unique features, but you're paying for those capabilities. There is an SDX sound expansion library, but you have to buy those expansions. MIDI expansions are available too. There aren't a lot of weaknesses in this category other than the price. ADSR also has a sample manager that's really good, and I've been using it for years. The drum machine's pretty good. Starts off with 16 pads. No surprise there. It's better than the 8 lanes that some of the other tools give you. It comes with a bunch of presets, and they're organized into different genres and different sounds. You can control the beats per minute, as you can see down here at the bottom. And it has a sequencer. The sequencer has 4 pages, so you can have sequences that are quite long. And although this sequence is 32 steps, you can actually increase that up to 64 steps. So you could have quite an extensive sequence. And there are different patterns within that sequence. So when it's playing, you can switch to a different pattern. It has a mixer. It has all the usual mute settings and solo settings. It also has bus routing if you want to send something to a bus instead of the main outs. You can do that all from here. In the sequencer, there's another view where you can take a sample like a hi-hat and modify the velocities of that hi-hat. You could click random over here, and it'll randomly adjust the velocities. Gives you an idea. One of the unique features is that you can split a sample. So I'm choosing kick, click on split. I can separate out the body of the sound from the attack. And if I split it into 2, when I go into the mixer, there'll be 2 separate channels for kick. One for the body, one for the transient hit. And you can apply effects to them differently. That's kind of unique. There are 6 effects. You see them down here at the bottom. Cut, EQ, compressor, filter, drive, and phaser. You can change the order of these things if you like, and you can turn them off and on, and then the controls for each effect are right there. Back when you look at picking a preset, you'll see it tells you how many patterns are included in that preset. So the patterns are not separate. They're included in the preset, and you can pull them in and modify them. The other neat thing about this is that you can add your own samples. So if you click on Add Sample, you can pick a location, perhaps on your hard drive, where you've accumulated your own library of samples, add it, and then, pick samples from there. You can adjust the kits while it's playing. Say the kick, just hearing the kick, hit random. You get the idea. Hot swap different samples in there until you find something you like. You can save that as a user preset and recall it anytime you like. Well, ADSR Drum Machine and Loopcloud Drum are pretty interesting. They have some strengths, that's for sure. Good features, 16 lanes, more than the 8 that you see in a lot of the Group 1 sampler players. Powerful sequencer, this one supports up to 64 steps, and it includes 6 effects, which is pretty good. You can split a sample into its transient and body. The randomizing includes drum sounds, as well as properties like velocity and attack and decay. The presets, it comes with a fair number, but really this product is designed to load not just samples from ADSR, but your own sample library, so you can get all your samples in one place. It's hooked into the ADSR store for buying more packs, so there's a lot of expandability there. On the weakness side, well, there isn't a lot of weaknesses, but it does have a very limited sample search and browsing capability, nothing like EXO or Atlas. And then, what? I have to buy it? Some things from ADSR are free. Here's Loopcloud Drum inside Logic as a plugin. It looks a little different, but it's very similar. I've picked a preset. It's got the same 4x4 grid of 16 pads that we saw in some of the other sample players. It has a lot of the same features down here for tuning, envelope, and filtering. And one unique thing it has is this kit generator. You click on the kit generator, click on generate, and it repopulates the kit. Kind of cool. It goes out to your Loopcloud library and looks for similar sounding parts to populate those kits. And you can see you have multiple attempts at generating a kit, and you can kind of work your way through them. It has this lock tuning capability, which is kind of unique. What that means is that if you've got melodic instruments or drums with a certain pitch, it'll try and lock in that pitch and find samples that match. That way you don't have to change the pitch, which is great. It has a mixer, just like the other products do, and you can route the mixer to individual channels, multi-output routing. It's got effects, delay, reverb, crush, drive, filter, and limiter, just like some of the other products. And it comes delivered with a bunch of sample kits, so you can just pick a sample, load it, and go back to your main page and play it. Down here you see that you've got room for A through H patterns, and each drum can have its own sequencer line. So you're seeing where the kick hits are, where the snare hits are, and you can modify things like the velocity and other attributes of that sample. So if you hit the generate button, it will generate velocity changes and patterns for you. You can see you can lock individual, you can mute individual or lock individual pads. That way when you hit the random generator, the ones that are locked won't change, only the other ones will change. So you've got randomization, both in terms of hot swapping individual sounds for any pad, but you've also got randomization for applying things like velocity patterns. These are some of the kits that come with it. So each one of these kits, starter kit, intro kit, they contain anywhere from 3 to 20 individual kits. So if you go on intro kit, you see the kits to the side here. And the kits include patterns that come delivered. And you can, when you open a kit, you can choose to lock the patterns that you have, in which case it's just going to open a new sound bank, a new collection of sounds, but not overwrite your patterns. And you'll see down here, there are key switches that have been set up. These ones will execute different pads. These ones will execute different patterns. Remember, we saw A through H pattern. And similarly, you can lock out the patterns, the mute and solo settings, the various parameters, effects, and the samples themselves. So if you just want to load a different pattern from one of these, you can choose that, and you'll still get the original sounds, but different patterns. For the Loopcloud drum analysis, there's a lot of similarities here between it and ADSR. Good features. One unique one is this kit generator, which operates really well. Also 16 lanes, more than your typical 8. Powerful sequencer, but it's really one pad at a time. The randomization is there. It also offers key switches for a MIDI keyboard or pad controller, which is kind of good for switching. And then there are a certain number of presets, but once again, it's designed for you to load your own samples regardless of where they came from. And it comes hooked into Loopcloud store for more packs and samples. So if you already have a Loopcloud subscription, this is worth looking at. Weaknesses, well, again, limited sample search and browsing capability. You can't edit all the sequencer patterns at once. As I said, it's one pad at a time. And it's a free plugin if you have a Loopcloud subscription, but you can also buy the VST independently without a subscription. Every DAW comes with an assortment of drum machines and drum instruments that you can use. I'm just going to go through the Logic ones. Feel secure that Ableton and Studio One and Reason and all the popular DAWs that are out there all have similar capabilities. So the most obvious one is something called Drummer. It's very simple to create a drum beat in Logic to match whatever song you've been working on. You simply click on the plus sign to add a track and choose Drummer, and you can pick a genre directly from there, or you can change it once you have that particular genre open. So on the left, you see a library of all the kits. So pretty simple. The tempo is adjusted obviously with your DAW, and you can make changes to that as it takes place. You have this interesting little interface that's designed to make it easy to modify the drum beat. You've got louder, softer down here, complex. And really what you're doing is you're picking the style of the drumming, not the sounds, but the style of the drummer. You're trying to capture the performance. You can do things like add percussion over here, the extent of fills, amount of swing, whether the kick is on 2 and 4, whether it's 4 on the floor. The whole idea with drummer is that you're picking the performance, the person that plays the drum and the characteristics. So up here, you'll see you have Darcy, but you can pick different drummers, Graham, Mason, and work your way through them. There's many, many different styles in there, and every time you play it, it's going to be quite a different style to listen to. As you can see below, you've got different sounds, so you can pick a different kit, and that's going to change the sounds that you hear when you're playing that particular style. So if I pick a different style, you can see that's a Liverpool sounding drum kit. Here's what they call a Portland style drum kit. So you've got a lot of delivered sounds and a lot of different performances delivered in Logic, and drummer is the easiest way to get those down, get those ideas down. Each one of these sections can be put into your song. You can have an intro and a verse and a chorus, and each one can be different, and you can cut and paste them, just the things that you would expect to be able to do. Okay, the other thing you can do is design your own kit. If you click on Drum Kit Designer, you get this interface where you can hear the particular drums, and you can say, okay, I want to change the snare, I want to choose different cymbals, I've got tuning and dampening capabilities. And once you have a kit defined, you can save that kit and make it your own, but you're basically choosing kits based on a preset bunch of drum sounds that came with Logic. So Drum Kit Designer is really the tool for modifying the sound of the drums to make them your own and make them sound the way you want to. Logic also has a drum synth, which is kind of unique. And the synth lets you choose different kicks, snares, percussion, and hi-hats. And these are synthesized sounds. So these are all the controls that you have for that sound. Pitch, tone, punch, saturation, the shape, sweep, decay, and volume, all the standard stuff. Once you've selected a group like kicks, you've got a list of what you want that to sound. And these are typical synth-sounding drums. Now, to execute them, you can create a pattern region. And in that pattern region, you can use the sequencer to define what that sound is going to be like. In the sequencer is very powerful in most DAWs. In Logic, you've got tons of patterns that you can choose from. Choose a drum pattern, it'll load up, an entire pattern for you. In this case, the pattern has 64 steps. As you can see, it's pretty extensive. You can make all kinds of modifications to nudge those particular sounds, change the sounds for each drum sounds that you might use in hip hop and EDM. And the sequencer that comes in Logic is very extensive. There's really, a lot of people don't realize that it comes delivered with dozens and dozens of patterns already that you can use. Now you can modify the individual kit pieces, of course, modify the velocities and all of the attack and decay attributes of each and every sound. And you can use this sequencer for everything. It's not exclusive to the drum synth. It's the same sequencer that's used for everything in Logic. The last and potentially the most powerful tool is the Drum Machine Designer, which looks a lot like everything we've been looking at so far. It has 4x4 grid, and you can have multiple grids. You can have up to 3 of them. So there's a lot of opportunity to drag samples into the Drum Machine Designer. I use this all the time. It's super helpful, and it works pretty much the same as any of these other drum sampler player machines that we've looked at. And you can drag any clip either from the Apple Loops library, or you can just open up a browser, samples that you've downloaded, and drag them in from any source. So there's really no limitations here on what you can use. There's always a lot of value in using the products that you've already bought. So if you have Ableton or Logic or FL Studio, take a look at the drums that are delivered. There are some strengths here specifically to Logic. It is included in your DAW, so it's well integrated with the whole recording environment. I would say that Logic offers one of the most powerful sequencers and step editors that's out there. It takes a little bit of effort to learn, but well worth learning. There's an extensive sound library. There's more than 28 effects that are built into Logic, and you can apply them to any of your drum samples or drum machine patterns. The Drum Machine Designer, which is just a fancy name for their sampler, is really quite limitless. When I've compared it to Battery and some other tools that are out there, I found it to be the most flexible and the most comprehensive. Apple producer packs are constantly being released, I think as a response to criticisms that Logic has been around for a long time. So there is new content from leading producers, and it works with GarageBand or Logic, but you can make use of that. There's a strong community of support because Logic is one of the top-selling DAWs. In terms of weaknesses, it has a classic sample browser search capability where you click on tags to kind of filter out what you get to see. It doesn't offer anything like that cloud-based metaphor that's used in EXO or Atlas. There is no randomization feature. You can swap sounds in and out. You can create your own kits, but randomization hasn't been built into these products. The first and maybe one of the most powerful drum machine features built into the Native Instruments Komplete bundle is Battery. It's been around for a while, and it comes with hundreds and hundreds of kits. You can preview all the kits on the left side in the Komplete Control browser, and you can tell just by the numbering, we're only at the Bs here. You can have quite a number of pads assigned within Battery. If you've got like a 64 pad launch pad or something like that, you can assign all of those in these groups A, B, C, and D. And so here's a kit that is in that typical 4x4 fashion. You've got the main area where you can modify any of the sounds just like you would with any sample player. You control things like the attack and delay. You make all your modifications on this page. You can apply effects. It comes with built-in effects like saturation and EQ and compression. There's modulation capabilities like 2 LFOs. There's the general setup, an editor, and there's a master for controlling the kit overall that applies to all the sounds in the kit. Another popular instrument in the suite is Butch Vig drums. On the right here, you can execute any of the drum sounds with a pad device and a 4x4 setting. You've got control over filter, saturation, something called grunge with punch, reverb, of course, delay, tune, and level. You can see with most Native Instruments drum sounds, you've got the ability not just to play the sounds, which are on the keys in purple here, but there are articulations. The Abbey Road 60s style drummer is an instrument that's quite flexible and very impressive. You can choose grooves to play on this particular kit. You can modify the sounds of any of these instruments. If you click on the snare, you'll see you can modify things like the overhead mix, the attack, the hold, the decay. Mixer, there's a bunch of options that you can choose in terms of velocity curves and how to modify the velocities. And you've got a library of grooves that's quite extensive. And just based on the kit off to the left here in the browser, you can see there's just all kinds variations on the kit, and you can load any one of them if you like and get a different sound. The grooves are stored as MIDI files, so if you've got your own MIDI files that you want to pull into this and use with these sounds, that's available to you. Another useful instrument in the suite is Cuba. Which has tons of percussion instruments you can choose. Sounds are excellent. Preview the bongos. It has a mixer view, so you can adjust the mix between the different sounds. The Native Instruments Komplete bundle, whether you buy just the basic or the advanced, has a lot of different drum instruments, not to be overlooked. They have certain strengths. They sound great. There's an extensive sound library that gets delivered as multiple instruments. So whether you use the Drum Lab or Cuba or Kinetic Metal, there's a lot to choose from there. It has built-in effects. The delivered grooves are MIDI-centric, so if you want your own MIDI patterns, you can bring them in. There's consistent features like mixer, velocity modifications, ADSR. There is new content always being delivered by Native Instruments. With each new release, they come out with new instruments and new sounds. Native Instruments makes great use of key switches, either on a MIDI controller or on the machine device. In terms of weaknesses, same thing as Logic. It has kind of a classic sample browsing and search capability based on tags. There is also no randomization. That is a lot of content to review. If you went through all those demos, you know just how extensive it is. But I think you have to look at it from a certain perspective, and I'm going to try and summarize the differentiating criteria so that you can make the best buy decision possible. At the beginning of this video, we talked a little bit about the goals of buying drum software. And we developed this realism scale where on the far left you have software that caters to beat making or sound design or experimental work. And then on the right, you've got software that's meant to replace a drummer. The drums sound real and the performances sound real. We also went over 6 different types of software: sample players, drum synths, drum sample collections and suites, plug-in sample players. We compared that a little bit to what's included in your typical DAW using Logic X as an example. And then I touched on bundled software. What kind of drums come with something like Native Instruments Komplete? We went over some common features at the beginning, and if you've gone through these demos or watched 2 or 3 of them, you have a good sense of what makes these common from one package to the next. But these are not so much the differentiators. Who has the drum sounds you want and at what budget? This really comes down to taste. If you have an inclination for real sounding drums recorded in a professional studio, there's packages for that. If you're more experimental and you've got samples that you want to include, there's a package for that. Can you load your own drum samples? This is very important because about 1/3 of these packages do not encourage or allow you to load your own drum samples. They're in the business of selling curated sounds of professionally recorded drums, and they don't want you to load your own. How many preset kits, patterns, and grooves are included? Well, the more the better, right? But at a minimum, you should be able to take MIDI patterns and bring them into your software. The power and flexibility of the sequencer or step editor should matter to you. It depends on how much work you're going to do in the drum software versus in your DAW. A lot of times you drag and drop your MIDI information into the DAW and make your final edits there. How important are the effects? Well, most of them come with 5 or 6 effects that are catered towards drums, but most DAWs come with effects, and there's lots of free third-party effects that you can download. Multi-output routing is important if you want each track, each drum part, to be on its own track when you bring it into your DAW. Some of these packages have layered samples, or they make the process of layering samples easier. But you could have done this before just by having 2 tracks with your snare on it, mix them, have different effects on each track. The degree of randomization, or how smart is the AI, the artificial intelligence, this should matter. In some cases, you're just swapping sounds, but you want that sound swap to be related to the overall drum beat and genre that you're trying to create. If it's too broad, if the randomization is too wide, you're going to get some unusual and not so useful results. But if you can control the randomization, as you can in some of these packages, it's smarter and more effective. The sample or sound library management tools should matter. This package is probably going to include all your samples and all your sounds, and you're going to use it every day. So the easier it is to use and the more features for browsing and previewing your sounds, the better. I mean, we're talking about thousands of potential sounds. The song mode that's built into some of these packages. Does it matter to you? Are you going to build your song inside the drum software, or are you going to build it in your DAW? There's a couple different use cases I'm going to go over because depending on whether you're a singer-songwriter or a hip-hop producer, one or more of these packages might be best suited for you. There are several use cases to consider. First one here is what I call the singer-songwriter who needs drums more as an accompaniment. For that, you need a wide variety of drum sounds, but probably traditional sounding. You want something easy to use, and you want DAW integration, potentially low cost too, because this might be a solo effort. Another use case, number 2, is kind of the hip-hop producer looking for creative beats. In this case, you want a wide variety of drum sounds, but you're probably going to need a sampler and a drum synth because both play an important role in EDM. Randomization or the hot swapping is going to matter. Having creative grooves and patterns is going to matter more than traditional drum patterns. Experimental sound design, where you can take a particular drum sound and modify it, kind of effects you can apply, and the ability for expansions is always going to be more inspirational. The last use case is what I would call the drummer replacement scenario. You're a studio producer and you're looking for the most realistic drum sounds so that you don't have to hire a professional musician to come in with their kit. In this case, the highest quality samples will matter. Humanization and control over the performance is going to be a bigger deal than the sequencing and some of the other capabilities. There are usually technical options in these packages like mic placement or surround sound. Of course, effects will really matter here, and having expansions just increases the flexibility. Hey, a lot of effort went into reviewing these packages, trying them out, getting demos. Some of the vendors offered free versions, some of them had trial versions. Some of these packages I own. But the bottom line here is, if you find this content useful, subscribe to my channel, click on the like button, let me know. Put a comment in there and share your ideas. Thanks.